Bienvenidos a todos. Me llamo Peter, Padre Peter, un fundador de este grupo Una Fe que Hace Justicia, y estamos muy agradecidos por su presencia. My name is Peter, Father Peter Gives. I'm a Jesuit priest and the founder of this organization called A Faith That Does Justice, and we are delighted for your presence here this evening. I also want to invite or thank our streaming audience. We know that we have people streaming from San Diego, from Washington, D.C., Nebraska, and other parts of the country. So we're trying to grow that so that people can get in on this as we move along. So welcome to all. Briefly stated, the way this program started comes out of my experience in El Salvador. I'm a physician by training, a pediatrician, and I worked in El Salvador providing health care during the civil wars down there during the 1980s and early 1990s. And for me, that was a transformational event. I was not a Jesuit priest at the time, but that experience down there really pushed me to try and live my faith in action, and this group is an attempt to do the same. We do it through 3 programs. One program is called workshops. They tend to be held at St. Cecilia's Parish. They're faith-based. For example, we had a talk recently on the prophets, the Jewish prophets, and what do they say to us today about listening to the prophetic voice and acting upon it in society? Whatever religion you are, whether you're Christian, Jewish, Muslim, or some other denomination. So we do that. We usually get 60 to 70 people at those meetings. At our community meetings, like tonight, we don't talk about a faith-based topic. What we talk about is really social justice issues. And tonight, you're going to hear a topic on one that's in the papers almost every day now, the immigration crisis, lives at risk at our southern border. We have a nice, distinguished panel here. I'll say more in a moment when we bring them to the stage. But it's an opportunity for all of us to learn something, to raise consciousness about some of the social events that are happening not just around the world, but in this country, and that are affecting the lives of vulnerable people. And the immigration issue is one of the big ones right now. We hope that you will hear stories from the other side of the border, people coming through to this side, and then also living in this country. There's an expression that is used, a lot of undocumented people in this country live in the shadows and in fear. It's a very difficult life. These people really out at night, it's very difficult for them because they're consciously looking around to see who might be there, being arrested, being detained, and being deported from the country. So we are very pleased to have a Spanish-speaking delegation with us tonight. As was mentioned, we use headphones, and everything is translated so that all people have a place at the table and can speak. The final program is our ESOL program. It's an attempt to involve people. It's English for speakers of other languages. We hold 3 classes during the course of a week at St. Anthony's Shrine, downtown Boston, pretty close to here, on Arch Street. And we are reaching out to people who have recently arrived who need language skills. And there's a direct correlation, and probably not surprising, pay in the civil society is correlated directly with your ability to speak English. So people coming recently who do not speak English oftentimes are subject to exploitation and very low income. And many of these people would have families, so these lives are very difficult. It's an active attempt on our part to live faith in action by bringing these people in and providing resources to help them speak the language, English language, better. And then we have partnered with Jewish Vocational Services. Jewish Vocational Services uses English as a means to an end. They use ESOL program to get language ability up to a certain level. And then they shunt these people into a job search program where they help them find jobs. Our partnership with JVS allows us to take advantage of that we are hopeful now, although we really seek out the lower level speaking people, that we're hopeful of getting their language skills up high enough where we can shunt them into the JVS program and help them find jobs. When you do that, in my judgment at least, this is potentially a work of justice where you're really changing the financial dynamic of a family, providing more opportunity for the people involved. In many cases, that's children. So I'd mentioned tonight that our streamers who are watching from outside are welcome to participate. There's a chat box that you can ask questions, and that we will do our best as we get to the question and answer period to answer them. So with that, I'd like to invite our panel up to come up on the stage, and as they come up or once they're seated, I will give you a brief introduction, and then we will turn the evening over to our discussion. So please come on up, panelists. So at your right, far right, is Father Pat Murphy. Father Pat and I met probably 4 or 5 years ago when I lived in San Diego, and we piloted this program in San Diego and working on both sides of the border. Father Pat is the director of the Casa del Migrante, or the House of Migrants in Tijuana, Mexico. It's a house for 150 migrants and refugees, people who have been deported, people getting to the border who can't get in seeking asylum. Father Pat's work is really incredible. I mean, this is quite an operation where they really take in all these people and provide refuge for them and offer them help as they go forward. He likely will talk a little bit more about that today. Father Pat, in addition to Tijuana, has worked with the Hispanic community in Chicago, Los Angeles, Kansas City, and probably a number of other places. In our center, we have Ivan Espinosa Madrigal, who is the executive director of Lawyers for Civil Rights. It's an organization that was the first to file lawsuits in this country to protect sanctuary cities, to save temporary protected status on behalf of the Honduran and Salvadoran immigrants, and to block immigration arrests at courthouses. So we look forward to hearing more about Ivan's work. And finally, our moderator tonight is Westy Egmont, a professor emeritus at Boston College School of Social Work. Westy also has a Doctor of Ministry, and he has focused his work on the human needs and social services of newcomer communities, immigrant rights, and the complex and dynamic process of the integration of immigrant people into this country. So with that, I hand this over to our panelists and Westy, and the structure tonight will be Westy will give some opening remarks. We will have an experiential speaker to give a 5-minute testimony of what it's like to be at the border working with the migrants as they come through. And then we will have about a 40-minute discussion among the panelists, followed by roundtable discussion for about 7 or 8 minutes where there are questions at your table to see if we can get people to share ideas about where they're at and what we might do together as a community. And then we'll end the evening with about 20 minutes of questions and answers from the audience. So with that, Wesley, please take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And I'm so touched that there is in this world someone like Father Peter who has given his life so beautifully. A life of such high intention, from medicine to the priesthood and all the training that he brings to this, as well as the compassion and the commitment to social justice. What a life model. I am also very pleased that you're here. You know, I know how many choices we all have. It's just phenomenal in this city how many things go on one night, even on migration, let alone all the other choices of your life. So thank you, thank you, thank you for making this a priority for yourselves and for us as a community. We are overwhelmingly, I think, becoming cynical and deaf, and part of that is just that we hear so much and so much bad news that it's really easy to shut it down and not listen, rather than to become engaged or to continue to respond compassionately. So I am thrilled that you're here and that your hearts are still open and responsive. Now, just before we start, I'd like to hand out the cotton swabs and have you each take a DNA sample from inside your cheek. We'll collect these, and we'd appreciate knowing the names of your brothers and sisters, wherever they happen to live. Oh, I'm sorry. That's the federal government, what they're doing to migrants, who's doing that. Current practice. Yes. So if you think that's just a little light-hearted humor, it's the dark humor of looking very seriously at the environment we live in. I want to introduce you to somebody, one of my students from Boston College, Carolina Velasquez, who's here tonight. Carolina, come up, please. I'm always thrilled when I get to take a class to the border or students take their own lives and become enmeshed in the migrant experience. And Carolina's family has been in the United States for a while, originally from Ecuador, but I saw in her that kind of commitment that will become a lifetime commitment because of the things that she's already seen and done, not just to have escaped through her family's route, but to have found for herself a route back into the story of life of service. So Carolina, please share with us a little what you did and what you've seen in El Paso.
Thank you, Westy, and thank you to everyone for being here tonight. I was down in El Paso with another peer from Boston College in December 2018, right around the time when they were doing coordinated and uncoordinated releases with ICE and Annunciation House. And we had a desire to help, and we really didn't know how to go about it. And so we got in touch with the social work school at UT El Paso, and they were able to put us in touch with Annunciation House, who had a really great need for volunteers and Spanish-speaking volunteers. So on the first day that we got to El Paso, we trained and shadowed, and by the second day, we were given crash courses in operations. We were getting around something over 100 people per day, just in our location alone, which was a makeshift school, which was a school which had become a makeshift shelter. And within the week, we were able to assist the shelter manager with her duties. Some of the things that we did over there was welcoming the immigrants once they came off the ICE detention buses. A lot of them didn't know where they were. We had to reassure them that they were being released and that they were safe. We also provided them food because they had been given frozen foods, they had upset stomachs, et cetera, from the food that the government was providing for them and which was inadequate. We also provided them shelter, and that was really the highlight of the service that we provided while we were there, and giving them communications with their families that were outside. So I think some of the families that stood out to us in particular were those who didn't know what happened when they crossed over with non-nuclear families. So in our culture, extended family becomes family, and not because a court says so through a decree or otherwise do you gain guardianship of a child. And so for a lot of those people, they were unable to know what happened with the children. They weren't able to get information, and we weren't able to help them. Other families that stood out were those who were unable to find sponsors or family members in the United States, so they just remained in limbo in our shelter. There was a sense of fear, and our interactions with them were limited, but I think the highlight of it all was really restoring the sense of humanity and dignity for them, because after being in detention, there were little things that we noticed, like they were so accustomed to asking for permission to use the bathroom that then they would ask us for permission as well. So it was those little things that we would work on, along with providing shelter and putting them in contact with their family members. Yeah. So,
Thank you. There's so much more to say, but
yes,
thank
so
you
much
very
more to
much
say.
for that. And I'm touched, there's a joke around this part of the world that says the last person into New Hampshire pull up the bridge. Right? There's the sense of those who've made it out of Massachusetts are not welcoming those who behind them want to come and migrate north. Well, in the real big picture of the world, I am so touched by the students who have in a sense, a DNA connection, but who could be so easily focused on the money and the opportunity and the privileges of life in the United States, who have eyes to see, a heart to remember, a willingness of the soul to be back in the middle of that struggle and to make it theirs. May we all be people of such integrity. Thank you, Carolina, for representing that. We are, I think, in a very remarkable time in history, and I want to read to you a small quote from the Chicana feminist Gloria Alzuda, who said, "The U.S.-Mexico border es una herida abierta, where the third world grates against the first world and bleeds. And before a scab forms, it hemorrhages again, the lifeblood of two worlds merging to form a third country, a border culture. This is the reality of what any of us who have worked on the border know and experience. There is an incredible open sore. There is incredible pain, and there is incredible lack of healing in the roughness of what is taking place. Theologian Miguel de la Torre said, "What do you expect when one country builds roads into another country to extract their raw material and cheap labor? Why should we be surprised that those same people take those same roads following everything that has been stolen from them?" Profoundly simple thought. We took half of Mexico. We've taken a lot of the values of Latin America to ourselves, and of course, we want everything except the people to follow. And this creates the ideological war. And then we are in an ideological war, a war that I think is frightful and terrifying, and it's played out in such dramatic ways in the current administration. I remember that first moment when he spoke to Congress, and he had victims of immigrant crime as a group sitting in the gallery, representing for him one of the pillars of what he was going to represent in his presidency. Hardly a major problem compared to whites with machine guns and with rapid-fire pistols who were going into schools and shooting, but central to his politics. And scores of quotes by the President of the United States who thinks Putin's a real nice guy, but he characterizes migrants. Hear those words he uses: animals, rapists, criminals, people with calves as big as cantaloupes, any way to demean and be derogatory. He campaigned on and continues to campaign on a big, beautiful wall. He wants to paint it black now because that means it will burn when you touch it in the Sonora sun. He has already added with U.S. military 6 rows of razor wire, sharp spikes at the top of the wall so that the children are maimed who come across it. He's having soldiers dig moats and fill it with sewer water and snakes. This is the real policy, the real politic. The politic is to separate families, to cage children, to criminalize those who are fleeing for their lives. We are living in the very apotheosis of the American legacy that says, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. How far we have fallen from such an ideal and such an aspiration. But I want to take you as people of faith and conscience to remember that this is not just about the current president. And I think this is very important in the almost hysteria that I hear in my liberal circles. The struggle has been very long. It's been persistent. Ronald Reagan talked about the flood of foot people, talking about the folks who came as boat people and comparing them, except not giving them the refuge that we gave to Vietnamese. President Clinton was the one who began building the wall, driving people away from the urban crossing, especially in Southern California. President Bush responded to 9/11 and all that was going on in the Middle East by creating DHS and beginning the militarization of the border. He focused huge resources that now we can barely imagine, to create the nation's largest law enforcement agency. Today there are 50,000 Border Patrol agents. Now I remember just 15, 18 years ago, I would go shopping in Nogales. I happen to have the privilege of family who live in the corridor there, so I spend a lot of my time in that part of the world, and we would go over for dinner. I'd go shopping. My sister's dentist is in Mexico. And we would just walk across the border and back without showing paper. That's only 18 years ago that I remember it being that free. And every year since, it has become harder and harder to pass through those gates. We are spending $30 billion on DHS and on the border, and I would just take a moment to say that that is more money than we spend on all of our international government's issues of the United States. That's more money than we spend on the environment and energy. Well, we are consumed by this issue. It's become an obsession. And we find ourselves in a place where Trump is doing all this buildup and all this spending, but it's not the first time that we've seen great efforts at deportation. I have to say with great tragic truth that under the Obama administration, 800,000 people were deported, a record by far, and one that was supposedly a trade-off. He was being tough on immigration in order to win the neoconservatives and get a vote that was for immigration reform, a deal that never happened, and all we have is the legacy of these deportations. Well, the current flood that, from the White House has filled us with anti-immigrant policies that come so rapidly that I can't keep up with them, and I do this professionally. They are today and tomorrow, and they were yesterday and the day before, one after another, orchestrated by Stephen Miller in the White House. And we find ourselves looking at things that impact millions of people, like the question of whether you can use public benefits and qualify for citizenship, or the issues of refugees with 65 million people worldwide under the care of the UNHCR, and having slashed the number from 110,000 under Obama to 18,000. The anti-immigrant rhetoric is backed up by anti-immigrant policy that is atrocious. And it is wonderful groups like the work that Yvonne does that takes on these policies, takes on the laws, sues the government. Our Attorney General here in Massachusetts has 18 lawsuits against the White House. We have at least, I think, you'll tell us the number, but at least 6 lawsuits going on against the White House just through the Lawyers for Civil Rights. This is the critical front line for us to understand that we are in an almost anti-law environment that is doing criminal things in the name of the righteousness of patriotism. And these White House efforts to remove regulations have been going on at a level that should astound us, but the courts are paying attention. And they have begun to overturn some of these regulations, thankfully. They've recently removed the regulations, the White House tried to remove regulations that protected children from prolonged incarceration. The Flores Agreement, which was denied by the court. Another court ruled that ICE cannot issue detainers, which involved holding inmates after their scheduled release dates so they'd be picked up for deportation in states that don't authorize such cooperation. The courts stopped this. Still, another case blocked the Trump administration's proposed policy to expand the entire country to so-called expedited removal process that bypasses immigration courts. The courts called the White House policies arbitrary and capricious. This is the environment we live in. The courts telling us what the Constitution of the United States says, what the law of the land is, and what the history of law has been, and telling us that our White House is the one who is bringing us illegality day after day after day. But this damage goes on, and the refugee numbers that have been slashed means that also the number of people who are coming as asylees have been mistreated. We now have people waiting in Mexico, right? A new policy, made-up policy. We're seeing it carried on, by the way, now in Europe as they're trying to do the same thing. Asylum by nature is to come into a country of refuge and to seek asylum there, to cross the border, to make your case. And we have now turned people away before they even leave Central America, Latin America, and come into the United States and are told that they are not welcome. The message is clear, isn't it? Well, this offshoring of the care of, or non-care of asylum seekers is an outrageous injustice and a violation of the Human Rights Declaration. Well, the U.S. government has taken into custody this year, by September 1st, over 1 million people on the border. Has taken into custody over 1 million people. I don't know if you understand how big these numbers are, how astronomical they are, and how radically different they are from just decades ago. We are seeing something that is so huge that the mind has a hard time comprehending it and knowing how to respond to it. It is a huge problem that there are this many people at the border, admittedly. And in saying that, it means all the more that we need good policy, all the more that we need bipartisan work, all the more that we need a responsible White House. And the chaos that they are creating is creating harm and detrimental conditions for the people whose lives are personally affected, who find themselves locked up in cages, who find themselves detained, who find themselves among the 50,000 people who tonight will sleep in a detention center, with over 200 detention centers, and will find themselves tomorrow to 50,000 people that night and the night after, because these detention centers have become big business and have a lock on the beds and are able to demand that there be full. And if that's not bad enough, the courts that should be the alleviation of the distress for some people are overwhelmed. Syracuse University does the tracking on this. CNN did the news release on it just a couple of weeks ago and said that we are at 1.3 million cases that are now backlogged in the courts. The immigration courts are dysfunctional. They can't begin to handle the caseload. But we put up more barbed wire and we put more people with guns, but we do not address the human need. Well, we could go on and on talking about the quandary, the misery, the dismay. That's not my job tonight. So take a deep breath, because one of the things you said when you signed up for tonight is tell us what we can do. I want to do a big picture of what we can do, and I hope you gentlemen will both add to what we can do. So go for the ride with me real quickly. I'm going to give you 13 ideas of things you can do. The first one is the one you don't want to hear. Money, right? We all say, okay, we get asked enough. I understand that, but we have to understand that every nonprofit, what these guys represent, and some of you have represented in the work you've done as volunteers, requires the charitable impulse of every one of us, and they depend on that small pittance that we can give, whether it's $20 or $50. It is the lifeblood of who is responding right now across the country to the migrant crisis and to the numbers of people who are here, both documented and undocumented. A couple of the names you should know is that if you like Act Blue, which I use for most of my political giving, they have volitional groups that you can go to. So Kids at the Border is a whole group, and they'll spread out your money to groups that have particular need at this moment. The Immigrant Justice Corporation. I've been involved with the Florence Project, which is between Phoenix and Tucson, a phenomenal social work, legal practice that's in the middle of a prison town. Casa I love, and what Father Pat represents is the most incredible. And they've had 250,000 migrants through this center in Tijuana. I mean, talk about being on the front line. It's an amazing piece of work. The Lawyers for Civil Rights, I would die to create this agency if it didn't exist. These are people who need our support. And if they're not going to ask for it, I'm going to tell you that we need to be behind them. And then, of course, the house we just heard about in El Paso and the work that's going on there. Second thing you can do, speak out. Speak out about this issue. And I mean at your dinner table. I mean at Thanksgiving. When you give thanks for this country on Thanksgiving with your family and the people you love, mention the migrant family experience of your family and pray for those who don't have food that day and who are longing to share in the prosperity of America. Bring it home. Bring it home to all of the folks. We all have folks on both sides of this conversation. Talk to your public officials. Please go to those. When they say they're having a town hall or an open district meeting and the public elected officials are there to talk to you, go to the microphone and ask them what they're going to do about this. Just raise the question. Make a little speech if you want, but speak to the issue. I just listened to 3 hours of debate last night in Ohio. I listened to the other 2 debates that have preceded it. How many minutes went to immigration? All right? Here's one of the most pressing issues that this president has made the hallmark of his administration. It is silent so far among now the 12 who made it to the platform last night. I'm outraged by this, and I'd ask you to make sure both parties are speaking to the issue. It's not clear that they're going to take the actions that need to be taken. Donate goods. You have some stuffed animals. It makes you feel good to do something concrete. I go down to the Kino Project in Nogales. Whenever I go, I bring diapers, disposable diapers with me, because these moms and kids and dads are showing up at the border. They've got nothing in their backpack for the care of their children. Every little thing makes a difference. And if you can get those things to the people who are welcoming people on this side of the border or who are caring for people on the other side of the border, it is life help, well received, genuinely needed. Work for, this is the fifth, work for a pro-immigrant candidate. Who are they? Well, fortunately, most of the Democrats have something on their website that they're pro-immigrant piece. Work for a pro-immigrant candidate, but find the folks not on the basis of their party, not on the basis of their popularity. Work for those who promise to do something about this. Maybe you have a house that has some space in it. Maybe you're the type of person who's always loved your children and now they've left you and they've left you with this empty space, or you don't have a kid and you'd love to be raising one. Well, we have a foster care program in the United States for kids who come across unaccompanied. It's managed here in Massachusetts by Centuria Care, which used to be Lutheran Social Services out of Worcester. They are placing people in families, and they are desperate for families where somebody speaks a little Spanish, but they'll talk to you either way to find you a child to match up with you if you're all willing to have a new member of your family. And you'll help them find a lawyer and to participate in the process to get them a status as they go through the difficult days with our government. Number 7, organize your parish. I am so moved by stories. I do a lot with the refugee program, Power, with Catholic Charities. I love it when parishes work together. Think about your parish, finding somebody in your town who's a teacher that's being deported, who's a sanitation worker being deported, and ask them where that person is going and follow that deported person, or that person is being detained in your town, and work together to support them and help them to be able to know that they're not alone and that they are accompanied, and you will help them to find the resources. Visit those who are detained. Attend a Crossroads conference near Nogales or one of the other conferences along the border. Organize people to go to the border. I'll go with you. I do this professionally, and I love to bring people to see for themselves and to see what they can do. Transport people to the Burlington ICE office. ICE miserably is out in the suburbs to make it hard. Take people to their meeting and then take them home. And if you don't have anybody to take out there, go out there and just take them home and make a friend. Provide bail. Bail is the most difficult thing to get for people who are so often $1,500 is the difference between spending 3 or 5 years in a detention center, a jail, where if we could give them bail, they could come out and be with their family, even go back to work. Help. Thank you. I leave you with this one story. A woman that I know who lives in Green Valley, Arizona, goes out for a walk with her dog every morning at about 7 o'clock, and over again, she's met people who've been on the trail. She brings them home for breakfast. Every time she brings them home for breakfast, her husband, Al, who's 88, cooks a breakfast of eggs and some coffee. They feed them. And you know what? Every time she does this, she's breaking the law and running a risk of going to jail. It is against the law. It is against the law to be a good Samaritan. God bless the Good Samaritans. Decide to be one. Be working for the kingdom of God rather than the laws of this White House, and you will do the work of the kingdom. With that, let's pay attention. Yvonne, take us into this incredible legal morass.
Well, I really appreciate the land. You've really done a fabulous job laying out the landscape. And also the things to do. That list was quite concrete, and I think it gives us a lot of food for thought. You know, it's interesting that things have become so polarized, as you mentioned. You know, at Lawyers for Civil Rights, and we've been around for a very long time, and around for also very controversial times. We were founded in the 1960s at the request of President Kennedy. When cities were burning, the president convened 250 lawyers in the White House and said, you have the tools, the talent, and the resources to help fix this problem, you know, in the aftermath of the assassination of MLK and other things like this. And he said to the lawyers, I want you guys essentially to take the civil rights struggle from the streets into the courthouse. And my organization here in Boston, Lawyers for Civil Rights, was established in 1968. We are part of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Network, and we rebranded here in Boston last year, actually in celebration of our 50th. And my organization did very controversial work at the height of the civil rights movement. We integrated the Boston public schools, so the whole busing crisis. We integrated the police departments. We integrated the public housing projects across Boston and many other cities in the region. And throughout that work, we never had to set up an alarm system in our office. But after Trump took office, we had to install an alarm system in our office in downtown Boston because of the barrage of hate mail, hate calls, and threats that we were receiving just for talking about the basic civil rights and constitutional rights that every human being is entitled to have in the United States. Under our Constitution, well-established constitutional principles that go back decades. But us just talking about it and saying that immigrants, irrespective of their status, deserve their day in court, could not be bullied or silenced or deported summarily, that you could not just go after immigrant-friendly programs and threaten to dismantle them or to penalize people for that, because that is just not the rule of law. And that garnered significant opposition, a groundswell that I cannot even imagine here in progressive Massachusetts, right? We do our work in Boston. We do our work in Massachusetts. We file our cases in the federal court in Boston or in the Supreme Judicial Court right down the street from here. And that barrage of intimidation and hate was coming from our own backyard. So we don't have to go to Texas, we don't have to go to Tennessee to see this type of vitriol and bigotry. I am very proud to be leading an organization that has acted tirelessly since the wave of hate started against immigrants to hold the Trump administration accountable at every front. And not just the Trump administration, but to hold state and local players accountable when they also perpetuate anti-immigrant policies. One thing that I wanted to correct Westy on is that it's not 6 lawsuits, it's actually 8 lawsuits that we have filed against the federal government. We were the first organization in the country to sue over sanctuary cities. We represent 2 low-income towns, Chelsea and Lawrence, and we sued to make sure that the Trump administration could not implement an executive order that it adopted essentially on the first day of the president being in the White House. We filed the lawsuit within 48 hours. The executive order came into effect on a Friday. We were in federal court by Monday morning. And that is essentially the work that we have continued to carry on day in and day out since then. We filed the first lawsuit to protect Central American immigrants who were being made essentially deportable by the termination of long-standing humanitarian protections, temporary protected status, TPS, that applies for people from El Salvador and for Honduras. A very similar program, deferred and forced departure, applies to people from Liberia. It's also humanitarian protection, long-standing under both blue and red, D and R administrations, but just summarily dismantled overnight by the Trump administration for no reason. And so we are very proud to be litigating those cases. We similarly filed the first lawsuit in the country to stop the arrest of immigrants in courthouses. I mean, sheer and utter madness, disrupting judicial proceedings to apprehend immigrants in the middle of seeking judicial redress, women who were in court trying to get an order, a protective order against their abuser in instances of domestic violence, unable to do that in a courthouse in Boston because immigration would come and apprehend them. That is a world that I refuse to live in and that we should all rebuke, because that is not the way, not just that God intended, but that the law intends for the orderly, redress of legal grievances. There is a time and a place for everything. There are traditional and long-standing ways of apprehending immigrants. If you want them, go get them at their house. Go get them at their work. Pull them over when they're driving. I don't care what you do, but do not go into a courthouse and arrest somebody seeking a protective order because their husband or their partner just beat them the night before. It is reprehensible, the length to which the federal government has gone to apprehend immigrants and make life a living hell for immigrants. And we've all seen the headlines. We've all seen the kids in cages. And I am sure that Father Pat is going to talk more about the lived experience of immigrants at the border. But the fact remains that that isn't just confined to the border. That affects us right here in Boston. Days after families were being separated at the border, mothers started just coming into my office in large numbers saying, I don't know where to go. I was just released. I haven't seen my kid in 3 months. We were separated 3 months ago when we were crossing through El Paso. I have no idea where my son is. My son is 9 years old, and I don't have an immigration case number. I don't even know how to contact him. Can you please help me find him? Another mother coming in a day later. My daughter, 5 years old, separated from me 5 months ago. I haven't seen her. I haven't heard from her. I don't know where they have her. To me, these stories should not be happening in 2019 United States. These are tactics that are really driven by terror. These are terror tactics to terrorize not just immigrants that are coming to the border, but it is to make very abundantly clear to all of us that this can happen to any of us, regardless of where we live or who we are. Because the way that we treat the most vulnerable among us, what we tolerate, sets a tone for how you treat the rest of us. And by expressly dismantling legal immigration protections, like the humanitarian programs like TPS, by deliberately creating more undocumented people to be hunted and to be deported, that sends shockwaves through entire immigrant communities. If you could do that to somebody who had a valid immigration permit to be here, what can they do to you and your children? That is a slippery slope none of us can afford to live in or to tolerate. And that is precisely why we have moved at every turn to make sure that these actions are confined and to use the courts, as Westy said, as a bulwark against this abuse and tyranny. And I want to be very clear, this is not about being anti-Republican, and this is not about being pro-Democrat, because if you ask Mayor Marty Walsh who he hates the most, he would probably say me, because I made a huge brouhaha about the fact that 2 kids, not 1, 2 kids were deported out of East Boston High School by a police resource officer affiliated with Boston Public Schools. So I want to be very clear that we hold everyone accountable, regardless of their political affiliation, if there is a violation of the law, and we, rightfully and proudly, sued the city of Boston and Boston Public Schools precisely for what happened in East Boston High School. So, long story short is, this stuff is happening, and it's happening in our own backyard. This is not far off in the border. This is happening blocks away from where we are now. And I think there are a couple of things that I want to leave you with. One is that as we do this work, and this ties back to some of the things to do that Westy was talking about, as we do this work, it is just as important for us to win in the court of law as it is to win in the court of public opinion. We have to be in the business of changing hearts and minds so that we bring people along when we talk about these important issues. It is important for me to be not the only one concerned about deportations out of East Boston High School, to be the only one who doesn't express concern when other anti-immigrant developments occur. It is critical for other people to speak up, for other groups to speak up, to use your power and your agency. We all have the ability to fight for ourselves and protect ourselves and each other and our families and our communities, and it is critical that we use it and mobilize at times of crisis like this. I'm not saying you have to care about everything. If you're fine with the children in the cages, okay. But then if there's something that you really see that pulls at your heartstrings, then activate yourself in that way. And I think that adds tremendous value, whether it is expressing it to your elected officials, organizing your community, your church, your groups along those lines, and there are plenty of opportunities for engagement. And I'm happy to discuss that in greater detail, even if it's something as little as lending the name of your organization for an amicus brief, like the type that we submit in cases that maybe we're not litigating, but that the Attorney General is litigating because they're better suited for those type of lawsuits in certain cases. And so there are many opportunities for engagement. Happy to talk about it in greater detail.
Terrific. I get to work with Father Pat through the Catholic Immigrant Integration Network, and we have a remarkable network of agencies that care about this issue across the country, and I have to say that the Catholic Church has been in the forefront of migration. It is the work the Jesuits hold together as common mission, and the Scalabrinis, if you don't know them, have made this the mission of the Scalabrinis to care for migrants worldwide. And the particular work in Tijuana is a Scalabrini mission. But Father Pat, tell us what the urgent issues are and what you are seeing. Put a human face on this for us.
Sure. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, good evening?
Good
Okay.
evening.
So these guys are really depressing. So let me tell you my big
So
beef.
sorry.
Entonces, en México, mi nombre profesional es Patricio. So in Mexico, I call myself Padre Patricio because I suffer. Because they call me things like Father Pet or Padre Patito. And the biggest insult the other day, I went to a conference in the diocese and they put Father Cat. So I said, no, Patricio, por favor. So I'm Father Pat Patricio, and I've been 6.5 years in Tijuana as the director of the Casa del Migrante. I'm not a Jesuit. The Jesuits wish I was one, but I'm not. I'm a Scalabrinian, but I hang out with a lot of Jesuits. Actually, I'll see about 70 of them at the end of October who work with immigrants. So the Casa's been around for 32 years. We were first Casa del Migrante in Mexico, and now just in Tijuana alone, there are 25 houses for migrants. In 32 years, we've had 260,000 people come through the doors from 50 different countries. So I'm never bored. It's very exciting. And I'll tell you how exciting it is in a few seconds. So we're always evolving. We have a full array of services. We have lawyers, psychologists, social workers, a work office. People can get jobs in Tijuana. We now have women and children. And so yesterday, looking on our Facebook, I saw that we even had circus performers at the Casa. So we're full service. And what we try to do at the Casa is very simple. We give people a secure place to be, a place where they can recuperate the human dignity. Whether they're coming from Africa, India, Central America, or being deported from the United States, we want to give them a sense of dignity, safety, and a new life. Our goal is very simple, that when you leave the Casa, you leave as a better person. And that happens most of the time. Now, sometimes we have to invite people to leave because they're not cooperating or they show up drunk or, they're not angels. But by and large, my 6.5 years there, we've only had 2 fights. Let's face it, you have more than that in your house every week. And we sometimes have rival gangs in the house. But there's a deep respect. We have this big picture of Scalabrini, and we have this big statue of Guadalupe, and they take care of the security, really. So the reality is, we've done this, and for the last, up until 2016, most of our work was with deportees and men. And then 6 months ago, we opened up the doors to women and children. And as we did that, things had to change a lot. And we're not disappointed. You know, a certain man said, the caravan was an invasion. I agree, it was an invasion of poverty, leaving those countries. Let me tell you a story of one guy, Jose, told me, I was living good. I was in Guatemala. I had a little store. I had a little business. I had no intention of going to El Norte, to the north. But then the gang started to come around. They said, we need $50 a week from you. $60 a week. This is the unofficial tax. So we were barely making $50 a week. And they said things like, oh, your 15-year-old daughter is very cute. Maybe we can take her and use her for something else. And that was the last straw. Jose said I had to leave. So I joined the caravan with the hope I'd get to the States and I'd be able to apply for political asylum. Well, Jose is a sample of all the people have come. And now through all the methods that are being used to keep people, there are 15,000 people just in Tijuana. And this is something that happens all across the border. The good Jesuits are building a house in Nogales for migrants. They're almost ready. They did consult with me for some ideas, but they're good Jesuits, that's what I said. So this is life at the border. It's the same. You know, and U.S. has come up with this policy that, okay, you can apply for asylum, but you're going to remain in Mexico. Because Mexico is a secure country. Tijuana is a secure state, very secure. We only had 2,500 homicides last year. And here you talk about Chicago. In the last 2 days, they've murdered 15 police in Michoacan. So there's a loss of respect. And by the way, the Mexican government, the new government, which is supposed to be our savior, has cut off all aid to all the Casas del Migrantes in Mexico. So they're not that much of a save. So we started accepting a new population 6 months ago. And so now we used to be 90% Mexicans, deported men, and now we're about 50% deportees, 45% Central American, 5% from other countries. And then we started accepting women and children, and we treat them just like every other immigrant. The rule in our house, you could stay up to 45 days, but you have to find a job, we'll find a job for you. And so we found jobs even for the women. And the funny thing is, the women got jobs, but then they had nobody to take care of their kids. So they were dropping them off at 7 o'clock in the morning to our house. So besides taking care of the kids and moms who were in the house, we had to extend our program to include these other kids. And they're wonderful kids. They're marvelous. I'd be out of my mind if I was them, but they're living normal lives. We're dressing them up, we bring them to school, they're just like the other kids at school. But imagine having 30 kids at your house. I feel like a great-grandfather. But I've discovered some things about kids, grandkids. They eat a lot. And they eat often. They're hungry every 2 hours. Is that normal? Never mind, don't answer. But they're delightful. They've given us new life. We had to hire a coordinator, come up with a salary, pay coordinator. God sent us the right person. She's the coordinator of the children's program, which basically is 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., together with our volunteers. And the kids are usually pretty cooperative. Pizza is the most international food accepted by all children. So life at the border now, we have these 15,000 people waiting for appointments. The people now doing the interviews for asylum are just regular immigration agents who know nothing. And many times they'll write down lies. I know this from personal experience. Do you have a fear to wait in Mexico? Yes. Has no fear to wait in Mexico. They've been told to do this. They're making it impossible for people to at least try to get asylum. Now, most of these people probably don't have a right to asylum, but they have a right to be treated with human dignity. about 1% of all those applying for asylum are going to get it. So what we try to do is sometimes we have a nice program, work with the United Nations. We have a committee that works with people who are asking for asylum in Mexico. Maybe think about the Mexican dream instead of the American dream. It's ironic that U.S. has a ban on several of the cities they send people back to. So what can we do? How do we solve the problem? I have the answer, but nobody asked me. I didn't invent it. It's Pope Francis. We'll blame him. He said best, build bridges, not walls. And not just down at the border, but in places like Boston, Lawrence, Medford, Cambridge. That's about all the towns I know. But because so much damage has been done to people's hearts. Even if we have a new president, 2020, the damage is done. You can't make a bad heart go away overnight. We have a lot of hearts that have been damaged. And we as people of faith have to build the bridges of those hearts to get people back on the right track to do what some of the things we've heard that we need to do. We need to talk to people about opening our hearts and look at people like Jose, not as a number, but as a human being. Let me just finish with one story about talking to migrants and not about migrants. We have a program where students come down from universities, and they often come from Loyola, Marymount, good Jesuit university. See, I say nice things about the Jevies. And one student, very blondie kind of student, one day she said to me, I've come here several times, and I keep telling my parents about this place. And you know, I think they're full-blooded Republicans and anti-immigrant, but telling them the human story, I'm starting to break them down. There's some hope that they might change their mind about this. So that's what we have to do, be storytellers. Talk to an immigrant, and listen to their story and share it with others. We have enough good people in this room tonight that I believe we can do better. We can be better. So before you leave tonight, please pick up this little thing called Pueblo en Camino. Tell us a little bit about the story of what we're doing at the Casa. And if you can't do anything else, please pray for us and for all my grandchildren. Thank you.
Well, let me thank our panelists and our experiential speaker, Carolina Westy, for your general overview, and Yvonne for the legal aspect, and Pat for your sense of what's going on the other side of the border. It gives us some great insight, so we're very grateful. The way we're going to continue now is we're going to do some table discussion. There are questions on your table. The purpose of this is to try and break down barriers between ourselves. Hopefully our tables are somewhat mixed culturally, economically, different ways, where we can listen to each other. We don't have to agree with anything anyone is saying, but we do need to show respect, that people are entitled to give their opinions, and then we need to be respectful of them. Following that, we'll do this for about 7 or 8 minutes. The questions will be on, for the streaming audience, they'll be on your monitors at home so you can actually see them and have your own discussions. I would tell the streaming audience, too, that there's a chat box. If you want to ask a question of our panelists, please do so, and we will try to get it to the panelists before the evening ends. So we'll talk now for about 7 minutes, and then we'll continue with questions from the audience until about 5 to 8, and I'll give some closing remarks, and we'll be finished at 8 o'clock. So please look at your questions, and let's have some discussion. Thank you. And panelists, please stay here. We'll be right back.
It's just like a commercial.
Okay. In the interest of time, I know you're having very good discussions, but I want to make sure we get some questions for our panelists. And if anyone would have a question also for Carolina, you're welcome to do that. So we'll the questions, the way we'll work it, we have people stationed with microphones at different parts of the hall tonight. If you have a question, please move to someone with a microphone, either on the sides, middle, and ask your question. Given that we have a lot of people, we hope we'll have some questions. We want to ask you to ask a question and not really make a statement or a political position. It doesn't help us. We really are trying to raise consciousness about issues, and by asking questions, we can do that. So please keep that in mind. And then we'll end at 5 of 8, and we'll finish at 8. So please, questions. I'll ask one as we start, if no one is up here. Many people don't really know much about TPS, or temporary protective status. And you know, for those who don't know, probably most do know, East Boston is full of Central American people, and they are a very vulnerable population. So can you just inform us a little bit about that, Ivan, of what the bills that are up and when they run out, and the consequences for the people if they're not renewed?
So there are dozens and dozens of different immigration programs. Asylum is probably the most well-known because we all can picture what an asylee typically is, right? Somebody who's fleeing persecution, maybe somebody who's being persecuted based on their political beliefs or based on their religion, right? There are many different bases for persecution. You could be LGBT and be persecuted, right? So people flee because based on their identity or their beliefs, they're being persecuted. That's asylum. But there are dozens of different immigration programs. Dreamers, for example, were protected by DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, a program that the Trump administration is currently dismantling. TPS is similar to these programs. They're all in the same neighborhood, but in a different house. TPS, temporary protected status, has been around for a very long time. Most people in TPS have been here for almost or over 2 decades with TPS under Republican and Democrat administrations. Temporary protected status is given to immigrants from countries that cannot receive them because the country is destabilized. So think here, for example, of Haiti after the devastating hurricanes that passed through Haiti. Think of Sudan and the way the civil war and other conditions in Sudan have destabilized the country. Sudanese people cannot be safely returned to Sudan because of the war conditions, Darfur and so forth that you've probably read about. So those Sudanese people have to remain here, and they are provided with temporary protected status. So that's just one of many different types of humanitarian programs that have been long-standing. TPS is fascinating. You should read about it because people have been here for such a long time that we've allowed them to live, work, and raise U.S. citizen children here. Many of our clients are in key industries. Haitian TPS recipients, for example, are overrepresented in home health aides. So in an aging population of baby boomers, losing over 50,000 TPS recipients overly represented in that key industry, that could have devastating impact for the economy. So these issues are really complex, a lot more than, oh, Sudan is suddenly safe and we can return you to Sudan. Well, that's highly debatable about whether Sudan is safe to be returned to. But certainly what we're saying is that the dismantlement of these programs needs to be done without any type of racial animus, and it needs to be a really rigorous assessment of whether these people should be returned. And these people have lived with us for such a long time that they deserve a day in court to determine whether or not they should be returned now or at any particular juncture. And so the request that we're making to federal court in many of these cases is fairly modest. It's not give these people a green card or citizenship, not at all. It's actually quite modest. It's these programs should remain in place until there is judicial oversight and review to determine if the Trump administration went through the appropriate process to be able to terminate them. And so we're asking for the status quo to remain in place, right?
Is there a question? Do I see anyone with a mic? Come ahead, come to a microphone, please.
Hi, Father Pat. Is that on? Yeah. I want Tell us about, if somebody is fortunate enough to get hooked up with Casa del Migrante, then they're getting services. How many of these folks, Central American, Mexican, are just not being served, whether it's in Tijuana, Juarez, Nogales, all the border towns? Is it hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, and what happens to them?
The latest number I heard was across the border is everyone's being served, but depends on your interpretation of service. We have one guy in the casa who's gone for 8 appointments, and there's no end. They don't say he's going to get it, he's not going to get it. So it's about 40,000 people that I would call them, they're in limbo, trying to get this asylum. And the people who have gotten asylum, I was at a conference last night and they talked about 3 cases they know. 3 cases of the 40,000. So the vast majority are not going to get asylum. So we try to, with the people we work with, we try to give them all the information so that they could make a good decision. Some are deciding to go back home. It could be a loss of life to go back to Honduras after you've been chased out of Honduras. Some are staying in Mexico, in different parts of Mexico. Some are going to try to cross the border illegally through the desert in a different way. So all are getting served, but nobody's getting served in as humane possible way, as humanitarian possible way of service from my point of view.
Okay, thanks, Pat. A question anywhere? Okay, here we go. We got one over here.
We were just wondering if, Ivan, that case, we couldn't remember that case in East Boston. Mm-hmm. And was it our lack of compassion, or was it the fact that it was way underreported?
It was significantly underreported. Shannon Dooling of WBUR actually did a really good piece on it, but the Globe didn't run it. The Globe didn't run its own series of articles. But Shannon Dooling from WBUR did an excellent piece talking about the deportation from East Boston High School. And in one of our delegations, as part of the many cases we have at this point, we've done fact-finding missions, including a congressional delegation where we took Congress members to TPS countries and other parts of Central America so that they could see the migrant crisis with their own eyes and to document conditions so that we can present evidence in court. And Shannon Dooling accompanied us in one of those delegations, and she actually met up with the student who was deported to El Salvador and did a follow-up story on his experience as now a person living in El Salvador after being deported from East Boston High School. So I would absolutely recommend that you look into it. We were very loud, as I said. Mayor was not a fan of that, but we were very loud about that precisely because people have a right to know about what's happening. And it's not about, raising the alarm and leaving people, alone. It's about raising the alarm and then having a conversation about, well, what are the meaningful policies or procedures that we need to put into place to make sure that these things aren't happening, right? To make sure that there is no improper entanglement between the city, the schools, the feds, right? That, I think, at a minimum requires a conversation about what is the appropriate protocol. Was there a breach of protocol in this case? How should similar instances be addressed in the future so that families feel safe sending their kids to school? I want families to send their kids to school safely. So does the mayor. I think there's a lot of common ground there. But I think the issues are so contentious that oftentimes, I believe it was either Westy or Peter who said this, about finding commonality and being able to create dialogue across differences is so critical, especially in these issues that could be the third rail. So I appreciate the question and definitely would direct you to some of the WBUR reporting on that. And I think it's important for us to be transparent about that and to also, if that bothers us, to speak up about it to make sure it doesn't happen again.
It is an example across the country, though, of individuals who think they are doing the patriotic duty to turn in a neighbor, right? This is, anybody who grew up in Eastern Europe knows a lot about a police state with this idea of turning on your neighbor, becoming the agent of the police state is a value. Well, that people are being told this in a whole variety of media outlets that are from the shortwave to some major networks, that this is somehow patriotic to turn in somebody who's undocumented. And that's a really, really frightful path to go down. And so in this particular case in East Boston, like many other cases we've seen across the country, and I think we in our civil discourse, we in our prayers in the congregation, we in the way in which we teach each other through our love and acceptance, are the counterforce to this kind of individual action of policing.
As a U.S. citizen, person of color who has also been stopped by ICE on transits here, what are some tips and tricks that you believe that some of these undocumented immigrants should have when being stopped by ICE, not necessarily per order, but just randomly on a bus or in a train? And how do we get the Hispanic Latin American community who are citizens here to actually get more involved with those who are not?
I don't know, Father Pat, if you know the name, but there's a couple of nuns out of Southern California who go parish to parish, and one of the things that they're doing is a Know Your Rights campaign. This starts with Know Your Rights. Every migrant needs to know that they do not have to open the door to their own house. If there's a warrant, they have to respond differently. But without a warrant, they do not have to. Because once an officer of ICE comes in, they will do collateral damage also. So there are all kinds of rights that people have that they don't know about. And I think it's the place to start this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't need to. He should give the workshop. I think it's more fundamental. If you ask me, I think it's more fundamental than what are your rights vis-a-vis ICE or vis-a-vis immigration. I think we do a really terrible job in terms of just civic education all around as a society. We don't let kids know when they're in school, like, how does the political process work? How does democracy work? What is your role in terms of civic engagement? What are opportunities for engagement for you? And I think the same, by extension, goes to knowing your rights. I mean, the same thing applicable for an immigration stop encounter would be applicable for a police stop, right? But kids aren't being told in Roxbury, Mattapan, or Dorchester or East Boston, oh, if a cop, pulls you aside, you don't have to answer those questions unless you're under arrest. The same thing applies with an immigration officer. If an immigration officer pulls you over, you could say, sorry, officer, I'm really busy. I have to go to this really amazing event, a faith that does justice. I'm running late, Father Pat is gonna kill me if I get there late. I'm sorry, I don't wanna be rude, but I really need to go, may I leave? And that right there puts the police officer in notice that you're asking whether or not you're being detained, whether or not you're under arrest. That's something every kid should know how to do. Every adult should know how to do, whether you're interacting to the police or reacting to an immigration stop. And so the officer will then determine, he or she will determine whether or not there's probable cause to stop you and detain you. And if they say, actually, you can't leave, you're under arrest, right? That escalates things. But I would be hard-pressed to think that over 90% of the times, people are not free to go. I mean, in most day-to-day interactions. So, we don't want to be rude, and you shouldn't be rude to law enforcement. They do a tough job. Don't make their day even harder. But you have rights, too. And it shouldn't, these two things coexist. And just because you're asserting your rights doesn't mean that you're being rude, doesn't mean you're being disrespectful. And so the same things apply. And I think when we do our Know Your Rights trainings, this is exactly what we tell people. We tell people, everybody who lives in a household needs to be on the same page about do not open the door unless there's a judicial warrant. And we show this is an immigration warrant, this is a judicial warrant. This one says federal court, district court, order, it's signed by a judge. This is legally valid, you need to open the door. And if you don't open it, you're gonna knock it down. This is just an immigration administrative thing that they printed in their office. This does not give them the legal right to enter your home. If you open your home, you are opening the door for them to come in and do whatever the hell they do. But you do not have a legal obligation to do that. Tell them to pass the warrant under the door, to show it by a window, right? There are things that we walk people through to make sure that they understand what their rights are. If anybody's interested in this type of stuff, we conduct these type of Know Your Rights trainings for free in churches, community groups, community associations across Greater Boston. Just let us know, and we can do it in English and in Spanish. And we could go into a lot more detail about that. But anyway, the point is, people need to know that they have the right to walk away and to ask for permission to walk away, whether it's with immigration or with a cop. And that's something that everybody in this room, every kid, regardless of immigration status, needs to know. And so, and now to your second point about how do we activate politically, I think there are cultural elements, you know, as a Latino immigrant, speaking as a Latino immigrant, there are cultural elements of, you know, as immigrants, we tend to think, you know, we better not rock the boat. You know, I'm just happy to be here, right? Like, I'm just gonna keep a low profile. Maybe if I keep a low profile, they won't bother me, right? Don't rock the boat at work. Don't rock the boat, you know, in any other context. And I think that's deeply damaging because that leads to invisibility, can't even speak, to invisibility, and it leads to marginalization. And I also feel that with the Latino, with those dynamics, oftentimes to activate Latino people, you have to personally invite them. You have to personally invite them to go to church. You have to personally invite them to go and open up their bank account. You have to personally invite them to go and vote. And that's something that we don't do, right? We say, go vote, but nobody has actually had a conversation. Hey, Patricio, you know, like, you have the right to go vote. Do you know where you can go vote? Like, I feel like that intimate conversation is often one of the missing pieces in that jigsaw puzzle. When you look at even the way immigration programs are rolled out, DACA with the Dreamers is a great example. They estimated that over 1 million kids would be able to qualify for that, young adults, kids. I call them kids, but they're young adults. And only about 800,000, 700,000 actually ultimately participated. That means there were a huge chunk, 300, 400,000 youth who opted out. I don't think they opted out because they thought, oh, you know, Social Security, lawful authorization to work, not my thing, right? Who says that, right? I think there's this mistrust of government, this mistrust of systems, this lack of intimate, personalized approach. I think if we would have had a much better outreach campaign, we would have been able to get more kids in it. The same thing applies to other programs, including voting itself. And so I think there's a lot more engagement that needs to be done in a linguistically and culturally relevant and proficient way as we do this outreach programs. And let's not forget that the Latino community is also polarized, right? Only about 70% of Latinos are opposed to Trump. In my family, I have family members who voted for Trump and who continue to support Trump. You know, these are complicated things, not just in white families, even in Latino families, right? And so the work that Westy was talking about doing, we need to do that within Latino families as well.
Okay, we have time for one more quick one. Go ahead.
Father wants to add a few thoughts to that question.
Go ahead, ask your question. Go ahead.
Thanks. Thank you.
I'll make sure I go first this time.
Yes, you go first, Father. Please, please, please.
So, well, thank you for giving the Latina the microphone. I appreciate that. So I wanted to ask, there's the narrative that if you're undocumented, you need to get in line and do it the right way. And you've heard of this narrative many times, right? Like, people are illegally in the United States. But can you go into detail about how ending DACA, ending TPS, and all of these other programs would actually put people out of status and in order for removal proceedings, and how the government is actually creating more undocumented individuals by ending these programs? Can you talk about that and explain how the government is actually enabling people to go out of status and become undocumented when they have documentation as of this moment? Thank you.
Well, Father, you need to catch up.
You get to go first.
You have
Yeah.
to go first. You had stuff to say
I don't
with the
have all
last
the legal
question.
stuff, but I don't think it's about law. I think it's about hatred and racism. That's what it's really about. And nobody likes to say that, but let me be the guy who doesn't live in the States to say that there's a lot of hatred, and it's being promulgated. It's being, you know, I was thinking one story. I asked one guy how he got deported. He says, I was fishing without a license. I said, what? Yeah, I was in Nevada fishing in a lake. I didn't have a license. And the ranger came up and said, you don't have a license. Next thing I know, I'm on a bus going back to Tijuana. So overzealous, you know, because somebody, like you said, you get stopped all the time. And overzealous people think they're immigration officers. And that is part of the racism package that I think we need to deal with. But I'll pass on the legal
Father,
stuff.
thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that story because I think it just shows how when you cast that net, how you're sweeping into it. It goes way beyond what the administration says, right? In terms of we're targeting criminals and gang members, a fisherman, right? Like, let's be clear. So really quickly, you know, many of these immigration programs that I was mentioning, like TPS, like DACA, provide immigration relief and protection. So what that means is that you cannot be deported. And they also provide you with a social security card so that you can actually work, you know, to earn your own keep. And I was mentioning how the TPS recipients, for example, have played key roles in nursing. DACA Dreamers, in particular, have been able to go to high school, college, have now had their professional opportunities as a result of being able to have this immigration protection and being able to have a social security card. With the dismantlement of these programs, we are essentially removing these protections, this status, from people who've had it for a long time. Dreamers, maybe not as long as the TPS recipients or the Liberians and other populations that I was talking about, but pretty long nonetheless. And it does mean, as the question was posed, that you're essentially turning somebody who has a immigration status into somebody who now does not have an immigration status and is therefore deportable, removable, right? And so we are, by dismantling TPS, creating 250,000 undocumented people. DACA is approximately 800,000 new undocumented people. So that is people who used to have some type of immigration protection and relief who would not have it if the Trump administration succeeds in terminating those programs. I think that's really important because it is true. It is. People keep saying, get to the back of the line, wait your turn. But the reality is that there really isn't a line. Immigration is extraordinarily complex. The Globe ran. They didn't run the East Boston thing, but they did run a really excellent profile. They followed a lot of our TPS work, and I would urge you to also look this up. Patricia Carvajal is one of our clients, and the Globe literally followed her for like a month, every day, to work, home, the whole 9 yards. And they did an expose on what her life is, what TPS provides for her, and it was a photo montage. It's online. It was in a digital thing, multiple page spread. It was like crazy. I couldn't believe it was that detailed and incredibly heartbreaking. Like, what is happening right now as the process of dismantling TPS unfolds. And all of these readers started contacting the Globe being like, she needs to get in line for a green card. She needs a green card. That's the type of person who should be a citizen. And then the Globe's calling me being like, so why can't your client get a green card? Why can't your client get a citizenship? Why can't your client get in line? Why can't she go into a different program? And I'm like, because none of that exists. None of that exists. This highly compelling story that you just read about in the newspaper is the lived experience of millions of immigrants in this country. The lucky ones with status that are now being revoked, by the Trump administration in an effort to deport them, the unlucky ones without status, but equally moving and incredible. And so, you know, when we hear those things, we really need to push back against that myth of get in line, wait your turn, because there is no turn to wait. Our immigration system is broken. That is something we can all agree on across the political spectrum, even in these polarizing times. And so let's be a little bit more nuanced about the way that we talk about those things. And if you want to talk a little bit more about how, you know, there is no, you know, line, I'll be happy to do that offline. But Father, I also want to leave you the last word, because like you said, I am depressing, and you have a very inspiring message. So I think you need to close us out.
Just that there's a lot of hope. You know, if you come to our casa, you think you're going to see old people crying. You're not. People laughing. They realize that they have a chance at a new life. It's not the life they want, but sometimes we can find them a job, find them hope that, you know, they have this new friend they're going to go rent an apartment with. Because that's another fiasco. Rent goes up in Tijuana. Tijuana is a very expensive city. So if you don't combine resources, and the casa is a place where people can combine resources and start a new life. And that's what we're most hopeful about. People come back to visit and send emails or messages saying, I'm doing okay, thanks to you. So that's why I want to continue to be a person of hope in a vision that's sometimes very hopeless. There is hope.
Okay, thank you. Given that we're at 8 o'clock, I want to make a couple of announcements. One is we'll formally end the conversation, but those of you who have questions, and I think there are more questions, just come up. Hopefully our panelists will stay a few minutes, and Carolina as well if you have questions. So with that, we'll end. And I want to ask you all to let us just show our appreciation for really a wonderful evening of discussion. And as we close, as Westy mentioned, you know, there's many ways to get involved. He mentioned some of them tonight. And one of them really is that, you know, we need financial support. These programs that we run, these open to you tonight for free. The ESOL program that we run is free to the people who participate in them. They are costly to us. So we need help financially. And there are envelopes on your tables. You can put a check, you can put cash, you can put your credit card numbers on them. It's all confidential. We'll take it in. If you want to do it yourself by swiping a card at the Emily in the back here, we will have her, and if you have a credit card, it can swipe. It's like going to the store. It doesn't stay in her computer, or it just moves through the space as it does in a store. The streaming people online, you can go on the home page to the upper right corner. I believe it's a green button, donate. Please consider us. We could use your help. So with that, our next meeting that we'll have here is in January, and it's going to be on the crisis of the environment. We have the Harvard Climate group coming in to talk about that. It should be very interesting, and we'd ask you all please to consider coming back. Invite your neighbors. All are welcome here. And again, a final thanks to all of you for being out tonight, and we hope we get you home without getting wet with all the rain. But anyway, thank you very much, and hope to see you soon. Wesley, great job.